Welcome to the Traverse Area District Library. My name is Melissa McKenna, and I'm the Department Head for Adult Services up on the second floor. And I just want to thank you all for coming this evening for the third and final in our Community Conversations Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration. So we did watch a couple of movies the last couple of Mondays. We had some excellent food. We had some excellent food again this evening. Thank you so much, Tony, and the Good Bowl. Okay. So, again, I just want to thank you for coming out in support of this programming series and our community conversations. If there's anything that you would like to see us have a community conversation about in the future, please feel free to get in contact with me, okay? So, for this evening, thank you for coming. First thing I would like to do is to introduce to you Holly T. Bird, and she is going to be introducing the rest of our panel for us. Holly T. Bird is an Indigenous attorney who works as a co-executive director for Title Trek. In addition, she is one of the founding members of and sits on the council of Northern Michigan E3, the leading anti-racism organization in Northern Michigan. Thank you, Holly, for being here.
Thank you, everyone. I can't tell you how I'm excited today to see this panel. We're making history today. I don't know if you guys realize that, but this is one of the first panels of its kind that we've had in Traverse City with our Asian American Pacific Islander community. And I'm in my feels over this, and it's really exciting. We started this journey, last year. When with Northern Michigan E3, we were recognizing that, you know what, we've got all of these really nice people that we're working with and no one from the Asian community. What is that about? And so the reach out was immediate and unanimous, that we wanted to make sure that we could use whatever resources we had to uplift their voices as well, being part of the beauty of this community. And I think the voice here is so important because there is so much history in the United States and in Traverse City that we can relate to people from this community. And so I'm so excited and so proud. We've got some amazing leaders here tonight. And one of the people I'm going to introduce who's actually going to do the panelist introduction is Judy Chu. And Judy Chu is Chinese American. Her parents both left China in the 1940s and eventually met in Taipei as university students. Her parents and brother immigrated to the US in the mid-1960s, settling in LA where Judy was born and grew up. In 1999, Judy moved to Traverse City and has taught at NMC in the English department since 2000. And I'm so excited that Judy's here too because she's been a very integral part of doing these series together. The library has been wonderful for hosting this, as has the Denos Museum. And thank you for being here, Mr. Hadley. So without further ado, I'm so excited and so honored to introduce Judy Chu.
Thank you, Holly. I guess I can take my mask off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for showing up. We've had a couple of events already, and I'm being told, I'm mic'd all over. All right. We've had 2 events, and we've had great turnout for Mondays, but this is really wonderful, so thank you so much for all being here. As Holly said, we want to kind of totally thank the folks who made everything possible. I really do want to thank Melissa. I mean, she's been there from the get-go. Both Tattle and E3, and then we also got funding from the Community Foundation. All the restaurants, along with the Good Bowl, that have participated, Mom's Kitchen, Samsara. Our volunteers, we've had a number of them, and there's one, Pam Yee, for tonight. And Kelly is, hi Kelly, and your mom, you brought your mom too somewhere? Okay, Nora pitched in, Nora's back there, Nora Robinson. So, I mean, a lot of folks have been helping out, and we just kind of are so appreciative of everyone who's kind of become excited about this event. And Holly Bird and Courtney Wiggins, especially too, from E3, who've walked alongside us. So, I'm gonna just read the bios of the folks who are here. And I'm just gonna say, I've been teaching for, a long time, 27 years. I'm still nervous, and I say that so that if anybody else is nervous, I mean, there are folks who aren't, but there are folks who are, but we've got this wonderful panel. I'm gonna start with, to my left, Sakura Takano is Taiwanese and Japanese American. Her paternal grandparents immigrated from, oh no, I've got this wrong. Is Taiwanese and Japanese American, born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. She spent most of her adult life on the mainland in San Francisco.
Air quotes.
Air quotes, that's right. New York and Boston. She's celebrating her 10th year in Traverse City and has enjoyed a career in the nonprofit sector. And she's now leading Rotary Charities of Traverse City. And next to her, is Tony Vu, who brought us the food tonight. He's Vietnamese American from Flint, Michigan. His parents were refugees from the Vietnam War, and they rebuilt their lives in Michigan. He's committed to building community and splits his time between his nonprofit work in Flint and the restaurant The Good Bowl in Traverse City.
Yay.
Amy Yee is next. Amy's she's the motor of the group. She's Chinese and Japanese American. Her paternal grandparents immigrated from the Hong Kong area in the early 20th century, while her mother immigrated from the Yokohama area of Japan. Amy moved from Metro Detroit to Traverse City in 1990, which makes her maybe the longest standing member of the group here. She's a small business owner and a licensed massage therapist and a certified myofascial release therapist. So, and I've been so happy to get to know all of them, but Amy is, like I said, she is the motor to this whole group. Craig Hadley is next. He's half Japanese. His maternal grandparents, Ishii Matsumoto side, lived in Hawaii. So we've got two people from the island. And worked pineapple plantations in the early 20th century, while his paternal grandparents on the Hadley side were farmers of Quaker descent in western Iowa. He has worked in college art museums since 2008, and he heads the Denos. And the youngster of our group, most important, Denny Nguyen is Vietnamese American. He was born in Southern California, like me, and raised in Traverse City, Michigan. He's lived in Northern Michigan for most of his life. He's an NMC alum, and has worked. And he's worked at the college in the Human Resources Office since, well, he's worked at the college since 2015, and he's now in the Human Resources Office. So we kind of worked up some questions that we're going to just kind of toss out to the group, and folks, they don't all have to answer. But hopefully as we move through them, there'll be time later. Hopefully you might have some questions to ask for the group as well, whether it's, I don't know if you want to put a single person on the spot or just to kind of get some group kind of feedback on that. So when we started, I'm wondering if I can sit. Am I close enough? I don't know. Can I? Can I? Oh, thank you. Thank you.
He's one of 5 mics,
There's
too.
5 microphones.
There's like 5 mics. I feel like a kid in a high chair if I sit up there. Okay, all right, this is better. All right, so when we first got together as a group in a Zoom, probably last spring.
Yes.
And it was after the spa shootings in Atlanta. So there was that sort of over us. Kayla Fond, who's not here tonight, had written an article for the Record Eagle, and she ended up talking to several of the folks up here, kind of highlighting local kind of responses from community members to the uptick in anti-AAPI violence. So that kind of started us as a group. And, you know, we were thinking at that point we were going to try to get something going last spring, and it didn't quite work out. So we kind of, you know, came back to it, and then we've been persistent. And so this has really been gratifying because these are some really busy folks. Some really busy folks. So again, it's been, I think we've all kind of sensed, wow, this is happening, you know, and so we're really appreciative. As we were working up questions, I think one of the first kind of joke questions we had, which maybe gets to the heart of a number of us, had to do with food. Actually, there's an essay that Jhumpa Lahiri wrote, the great Indian writer, in 2015, and about a food suitcase that her family, her parents, would kind of constantly use on all the trips, kind of coming back and forth. And although we didn't talk about that particular essay, I was thinking about that because that's kind of what we wanted to talk about first. And so kind of our warm-up question after you've had a lovely meal is, what foods are in your suitcase when you come back to TC or when your family visits? Because it's like, I think we all want certain things. And we've had to figure out how to get them. I mean, we have some access to them here. And the internet has really helped, obviously, but at the same time, I think it's still something. And I think even in some of the emails, like, Craig would make some joke like, my parents are coming looking forward to that suitcase, you know? So maybe we could just kind of hear from folks first. What foods are in your suitcase?
Well, I'm gonna jump right in because we ate one of the Hawaiian Portuguese sausages yesterday, and you have to like slice it and just appreciate every last morsel, because my mom packs it, she freezes it, rolls it in like 18 newspapers, and then rolls clothes around it for us to bring it back. And it's one of those things where it's just like the sense of comfort, the sense of home, which ironically is from a whole different part of the world, which kind of describes what Hawaii is like. It's a melting pot, so we eat everything and have, you know, great appreciation for lots of different cultural traditions and sharing them too. When I first met Craig in person, knowing that he had a history and family in Hawaii, I brought him a frozen Portuguese sausage to the Dennis Museum.
That was really,
And I
really
said, it's my second to the
appreciative.
last one. You really better appreciate this.
And we did.
Yeah, I would say my food is, it's called za, and it's a pork steamed sausage that's wrapped in banana leaves. And, you know, I mean, it's good and I love it. But I don't know why my mom, like, loves to give me it every time I go to visit her. You know, I'll leave, they live in Houston, and I'll fly down, you know, just for a weekend. I'll have, like, a backpack, you know, like, for my clothes, just like a weekend kind of thing. And then I'll leave, and she'll give me, like, 20 pounds of these like sausages that I have to figure out what to do with. And, and they smell like banana leaves. And so then I have to like rearrange my backpack, like my clothes smell like banana leaves, everything smells like banana leaves. And, 9 times out of 10, when I go through airport security, I get pulled over, like there's still, I see the security guard opens the backpack, looks at it, and is like, what is this kind of thing? I'm just like, it's sausage, I know, I'm sorry. Why do you have so much? I was like, my mom, that's why. But to that effect, yes, it's not only just an amazing thing of a reminder, obviously, of home and everything too, but like, I have so many memories from college, from everything of like, me leaving in some capacity and just like being shoved all this food because it's like it's a love language and it's an amazing thing.
So my response is going to be short because the only thing that I've ever come back with is called Maicha. Does anybody know what Maicha is? How many hands? Aha. So Maicha is roasted rice with green tea. And it is just, for me, really soothing. And we actually, I don't know how many of you grew up eating, after you make the rice, after dinner, you add water to it. And then we called it nunjuk.
Oh, we call it ochazuke.
Ah.
My kids had it for breakfast today.
So Genmaicha reminds me of that. And I'm actually finding out more about my ancestral roots through this group. And the next time that I go to visit my family, I'm going to stop at the Japanese market and pick up some traditional foods. So that's all I've got to offer today is Genmaicha.
No, but it's delicious.
Oh, it is.
Gosh, so many different foods. I have memories as a kid. We only saw my grandfather in Hawaii about once every 3 or 4 years because we lived in Indiana or Illinois or Texas, so it wasn't easy to do. Every Christmas, he would send us a care package from Hawaii, and it would always be the same thing. One package would be seaweed, rice crackers, all those types of dry good snacks that we just couldn't get on the mainland. But the second thing he would send is an entire box of Dole pineapple. When Dole still grew pineapple in Hawaii, which they don't really do that anymore. But that was such a treasure to get that. Particularly because there was such a language barrier between our family, my parents and myself and my sister, and my grandfather, because he had such a thick pidgin accent. And as a kid growing up in the Midwest, I just couldn't understand him. So you'd have these long distance phone conversations, okay, you get 5 minutes, you get 5 minutes. But it was the food, right? That was the love language, so.
I don't travel very much, so I'm just gonna talk about my family and growing up. We would go down to Grand Rapids to go to the Asian market there to get stuff to stock up every couple of months on stuff, and we would always bring back like tons of fruit, fresh fruit, and it was just something that like I remember vividly growing up and just like coming home with like all this fruit, and we'd peel fruit, and my mom would slice up fruit, and it just so many different kinds of fruit that you can't get here. And that's just what I remember, and they bring back so much stuff when they go to California to visit my grandma too, so fruit for me.
Definitely. Yeah. Is there anything, it's kind of just one more follow-up food question. So is there anything that like you make, that any of you that you make, like, that, because like before I moved here, my father's from northern China, Manchuria. So I started to panic because I was like, I won't get dumplings. I won't get pot stickers. So I was like in my 20s, and I took it for granted. I let him make it all my life. So I was like, you need to show me how to make that, right? So I wonder if like there are things, so like when I make that for Chinese New Year, for Lunar New Year, I think of my family. So I don't know if there are things that you'll make. I mean,
Dumplings.
Yeah.
Dumplings are a labor of love because they take forever to mince all the things that that have to go in the dumpling mix. So you can't just throw it in a blender and, make it go all crazy. You have to mince the garlic. You have to very finely mince the garlic and the ginger. You have to salt Napa cabbage and then squeeze all the water out so that you don't have watery dumplings. And if you are lucky, you can get Chinese chives in Grand Rapids or Detroit. I got this guy here. Brings me chives. And, so the filling itself can take like 2 or 3 hours. And then you have, 3 or 4 pounds of this filling that has to end up in a wrapper and it has to be beautifully closed. So my trick is I invite friends over.
Yeah, there you go.
And we have a dumpling making party, and everyone gets to take some home and put her in their freezers, right? Like kids love dumplings, and so whether you fry them or steam them, it's just such a wonderful like community and communal event, and you get to work through all that very labor-intensive filling and mix.
Yeah. Mine would be pho. It's just something. It's a labor of love, and it's some of my earliest childhood memories are just watching my mom like all day, just like having this pot and like constantly checking in on it, like giving me like little tastes as the broth kind of gets more complex throughout the day and everything, and then remembering like going to bed and then waking up in the morning and then just getting like hit with like all the smells and everything. Just being filled with so much excitement. It's had such a huge role, not only just of me understanding and giving me a love for food, but that it's also really it's a dish that changed my life as well. I didn't start cooking, at least professionally, until about 15 years ago, and when I first started, I always knew that like as soon as I started serving pho and like got the process down and everything, that it was gonna, I knew how powerful I guess it was because I knew how much it changed my life and like how much I loved it, and so I was really excited to be able to express that and share that dish and that love of it as well. So
That's like an essay. That's the memoir title, right? The dish that changed my life.
in a lot of ways. But yeah, that's the one go-to for sure. I mean, it's just I have so many memories of it, and it's just kind of embedded as a part of me now, I think, at this point. So
Wow. It's not really fair sitting next to this guy. So,
Yeah, I mean.
should have answered last.
We don't
sorry.
have to do.
so nunjuk. No, I just. I don't really cook much, to be honest, but when I do, I'll make a stir fry because that's fairly easy once you make the rice and throw some vegetables in there and maybe like a store-bought Szechuan or something, right? So anyway, I'll pass it on to Craig.
No, this is easy. Manapua, so stuffed pork buns. Yeah, Ron's back there like, yes. In fact, I ordered pork buns. I ordered Manapua for my mom one birthday or Christmas. They lived in Montana, and I had it express shipped dry ice from the island where she grew up in Oahu. Libby's Manapua, pink box. They mailed it to Montana, but the dry ice didn't last. And I was so heartbroken. She said, "It's so sad. I have to throw this out." But this is the place she went as a kid with her parents to buy Manapua on Sundays or whatever, right? They closed a year or two ago. They're no longer operating. But the family Manapua recipe, every time I see my mom, we work on it, we make it, my grandmother's recipe. And I have fond memories as a kid being told my mom would make the dough, that's all day. Craig, take the dough upstairs and put it in a warm place under the skylight so it can rise, So that was a day of doing that, a day of making the meat and seasoning it and then steaming. So, I mean, we're talking a full day, day and a half process if you do the meat overnight. But we do this together every time we see each other, and that's what Thanksgiving often looks like for us and our family. It always has as a kid. It was always half Japanese and Hawaiian dishes, shrimp fritters and manapua and some of these other things, and then turkey, and stuffing. So my son now growing up, he's 7. He's like, oh yeah, are we gonna have He just thinks it's like every family's doing this.
Right.
Every family's having manapua. So,
And
anytime, yeah. You gotta bring something. Yeah.
And Craig, you want a food truck, you said, you told me.
Yeah,
once
that's
at some
my,
point.
I don't even want to say it's my backup job, right? That's like a dream job, is to make Manapua out of a truck and drive it around. Make Manapua in the summer, do shave ice, like 2 or 3 Hawaiian kind of Japanese things, and I think that'd be so fun. One of these days, if you're an investor, let's figure that out.
I'd love to see that. I also love pho. I haven't gotten around to learning how to make it. Thankfully, my mom lives here, so I can visit her and enjoy pho in her home. I haven't really done a ton of like Vietnamese cooking, but I've started getting into it a lot more lately, especially during the pandemic. And one thing that I recently and this last year started making was chaya, Vietnamese spring rolls. So they're just like fried egg rolls, kind of, but that's what we would have like at parties and celebrations growing up for New Year's. So it's just something that's very nostalgic to me and similar to the dumplings. Just something that brings back a lot of memories. I remember helping my mom make them too, so.
I think I was in my late 20s when I started to say to my parents, show me how to make things. So you're getting there, Danny.
Same for me.
So, I mean, while the food is like the celebration, it's the love language. A number of our other questions, we'll just kind of wind through different kinds of themes. But, you know, I should say, you heard the biographies, and so we all come from really different backgrounds, and we by no means represent kind of the range of all Asian Americans. I mean, it's a radically diverse group, and so what we say is obviously just kind of unique to our own individual stories, but sometimes there are themes that will recur. Can you share about a time you were asked, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Because that happens a lot, or it has, so. And we don't have to go down the line, it can be however, but we can.
Well, I'll share a story kind of to your earlier point of how we all kind of really have our own very unique experiences. Because when I left Honolulu and came to the mainland for college, I met all of these Asian-looking people, but they didn't act like the Asians that I knew back home. And so I was asking, no, like, but where are you from? Because kind of talk different, and it was a very like big cultural, culture shock for me. And I discovered that they were from Minnesota and Michigan and all these states that I didn't really have a lot of experience with. And so I like look back on that now. I'm like, oh, this can happen to all of us, where we're wondering, where are you really from? And I think oftentimes, it's out of curiosity and innocence and just like wanting to know more about somebody else. And I think just sometimes when it gets asked in a different context, that's where it starts to feel like, oh, I don't, like, why do you want to know, right? And this did happen to me this winter, I think. It was this winter. We were waiting in line for a hot dog.
Oh, right.
And I got the question, like, and I got, do you speak Mandarin? And I said, no. Do you speak Mandarin? Like, well, kind of. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's great. Well, where are you from? I'm from here. No, well, like, where are you really from? I'm from here, just like you. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from America. I'm like, oh, me too. So, it kind of just like, for me, I felt like I needed to like own that moment because it wasn't, it didn't feel like it was being asked in like in a curious and like generous way. And so I guess if you are asked that question, you're not comfortable, like, I think there are other ways to express it, and then also just say, you know, where are you from, and what, I don't know, what about you?
Turns into this genuine cultural exchange.
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe if it begins, it's interesting, because it's like, maybe it's a thoughtless question, or maybe it's innocent, or, but it's like kind of trying to put it back, the oddness of it, put it back on them. I think that's kind of something that maybe other folks can speak to as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll keep mine short. I always respond, I'm from the womb. That's how I deal with it.
How do they respond to that? That's great.
I wish I knew that in second grade. Back in time and tell myself. I got that a lot more as a kid, I think, than even now. But as a kid, growing up in Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, I was born in Nebraska. I got it a lot because I was often the only kid in the classroom that looked a little different, But this is a long story, but right, biracial identity can be really complicated, right? So as a kid, I'm asking my parents as I'm getting older, like, well, so what am I? Am I white? Am I Asian? The census is coming up, right? Like, what do we put? And honestly, one of the most painful things as a kid, for me, painful memory, is thinking back to those standardized tests, right? This is the late 80s, the early 90s. Check one, it's like white, Asian, something, other. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Am I white? Am I other? So that's taken me a long time to figure that one out. But basically, if it's Asian, if it's white, it's like I'm doing both, even if it says do one, because biracial identity is complicated, right? And so that's something as a kid with the where are you from question. As a kid, I wasn't equipped to deal with that. I didn't know how to answer it. My parents didn't know how to tell me. It wasn't until I went to college and I started to, for myself, kind of figure it out, right? It took until my 20s to really grapple with that question.
So I had an incident like that. Well, not like that, I'm sorry. I was invited to some kind of a party by a woman friend of mine, and when I got to the house, the men were all sitting like in the living room, and they were like, oh, the ladies, they're in the sunroom. And by the way, where are you from? And as I'm quickly processing this, I'm like, the ladies are in the sunroom, okay, And the men are here, and where are you from? And I just didn't like the manner of the question, because it could have been, what's your ethnicity? Or what's your heritage, but just kind of the feeling of it, the separation that I felt, and where are you from? And so I just smiled and said, I'm from Detroit. No, where are you from? Oh, well, I've been living in Traverse City no, where are you from? Oh, you mean what's my ethnicity? Well, I'm Chinese and Japanese, and, it's kind of boggling, because I could say, where are you from? And if you're not originally from this land, like the Native Americans are, then you shouldn't be asking me in this manner. But anyways, I kind of, thank
really
you.
good.
Yay!
Especially you were the guest. You were coming to someone's house for a party, and to get that question.
Yeah,
just as a
so
sense of-
I think, like Sakura said, it depends on the way that is asked. And, I have a little rebellious streak, I suppose, so. Anyway.
Right.
I don't really remember getting this question a lot growing up and in school. I might have just blocked out those instances, but I recalled this one time when I was at a bookstore with a friend of mine, a white friend, and we were like by the languages section or something. I think I was trying to get a copy of The Little Prince or something. But this gentleman, this older gentleman, came up and asked me where I was from, and I answered, and then I think we got into it, and I explained that my family's from Vietnam, and then he started like asking me questions about the Vietnam War, which made me feel really uncomfortable. And you know, that's the extent of the conversation that I remember. Like, I remember like not wanting to be there. My friend and I had other plans, and we really just wanted to get out of there. Eventually, I ended up just taking my phone out, setting a timer, and pretending I got a call when the timer went off. And I left, and he was still talking to my friend. But we got out of there, and it was just like really an interesting kind of like being approached by someone like that and being asked that kind of question in a bookstore. But I think about that a lot more lately too, so.
Danny, was that when you were like in high school or?
It was after I started college. It was like
Yeah.
maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. And when like you're young and that sense of kind of, oh, you suddenly are on the spot and you're being asked about the Vietnam War.
I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, the sense of representation.
Like, I'm
You
from
could,
Traverse
you could have
City, like,
helped him
I'm-
to the reference
to the book,
section.
that section of the book. Yeah.
I have a question, I guess, for the panel too, because, you know, in thinking about this, like, you know, one is like this whole question or notion of like, where are you from? Like, do you feel like it's more so asked from, you know, to like people of Asian descent? And because I feel like that at least there's like a bent like towards that, right? And you know, it's just the fluidity, I guess, of the perspective of Asians, of how we're viewed, because it's either we're lumped into like one group and it's like all Asians kind of thing, and then you have this other spectrum where it's just like, well, where are you from, as if it's like a genuine question, but like I don't even understand like the answer behind it, or like even the purpose of it, because if I mean, one, if you're really interested in understanding my history and like where I'm from and everything, and you know, maybe you're picking up on something, sure, if it's an honest conversation. But if it's just this kind of like norm of like, that's what you
Right.
do and ask Asians, and then I can tell you that I'm Japanese or I'm Chinese or I'm Vietnamese, does it matter to you like which answer I give you, and like how does that lead any conversations from that question?
Right.
You know, like I guess like what I'm trying to figure out is like how is that a thing of like the go-to question, I guess, of sorts.
Right.
You know, and I don't know, maybe there's no answer.
Can I take a slightly academic approach to it? So, I mean, honestly, I think a lot about this. I think to some extent it has to do with Orientalism and the 19th, early 20th century, the way Asians have been portrayed for the past 100 years, 150 years in film, books, all of these things. I think there's an exotic element to some extent of like, oh, I have to know. This is what I ask somebody that looks different. But that's the way I've been thinking about it more, is that I think there is at least in the US, at least 100, 120 years of now history, film, books, media, all these things that have created stereotypes and images about Asians.
It's the exotic, and then the perpetual outsider.
Yeah.
Kind of all bundled together. But yeah, I never quite thought of it that way, Tony. Like, do they really want to know, and will that inform them in any further way? Like, do they know the difference between these
No.
different?
Sometimes no.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. I was with my husband walking around our neighborhood, and we have a great dog who gets a lot of attention. So we were in a conversation, a fellow had stopped in a car, and he had a hat, he was like a vet, and but the way he asked, he seemed very aware that of being respectful and asking, you know, where, and it was more, I can't even remember, Robert can kind of remind me how he phrased it, but it was almost like, where's your family from, or so, it was like a different way. It wasn't just like you, kind of you pinpointing you at this moment, and he paused a little bit before he asked, and I remember thinking, I didn't mind at all, because I knew that we were having a conversation, but almost because he kind of paused before he asked, that it felt like he was mindful of how loaded that question was. And that's a rare kind of thing to experience too, for me.
That's true. If it's asked out of respect or genuine, interest in politeness, then it's different than where are you from? You're not from around these parts, are you? Right? Anyway. Yes, right.
Right. Which maybe, especially during kind of the last couple of years, has felt maybe more pronounced if we've been asked that question. So if we kind of think about the next question is, what's it been like during the pandemic? In terms of, as the news started trickling in, or you started to kind of hear from your friends or family in different parts, or perhaps through experiences or encounters on your own, as kind of this violence targeting Asians has increased, and the rhetoric has kind of been out there about the origins of coronavirus. How has that been for folks? Have you, yeah.
Well, I have family in Japan still, and so when everything was just starting to ramp up, I was just concerned about safety and how this, we know so much more now, or do we? And so I think that was, felt very real and like close to home. Thankfully, my family's all safe. And when we fast forward to, demonstrations of anti-Asian hate in, bigger markets and bigger cities. I mean, I have a lot of friends that live in San Francisco and New York where women who are standing in the subway platform are getting pushed to their death. I mean, or beaten. And, I feel so terrible about that, but I also feel very safe in our community because I do have this like amazing sense of community here. And, I wish that like more people could have that sense of community where we are genuinely sharing in cultural traditions, and kind of sharing how we feel about this stuff, whether it's through like group chats with friends or just people checking in with me one-on-one on text, usually like, hey, I saw this happen in San Francisco. Like, how are you feeling about this? How is your sister? I mean, I think that's just been like a huge relief and resolve because I feel like my kids are safe here. And so I feel kind of lucky to be in Northern Michigan and having that sense. I mean, I think we do have a very special place here when it comes to that building that sense of community. Because even if you do feel alone or if you are new to the area, my overwhelming experience has been that like people will just like jump out of the bushes to like help you feel comfortable and introduce you to their friends and talk about the weather. I mean, it is, we're
That's just
pretty
such an
lucky.
interesting image.
I don't know that I'd feel comfortable with that, but I know what you're saying. Here to help you. Yeah.
So last week we showed a film on Vincent Chin and just kind of a sobering take on what it's like to be Asian sometimes. And I actually spoke about an incident that I experienced when the pandemic first began. I was actually in the hospital with severe pneumonia. It was a bacterial flu that landed me, I wasn't in ICU, but anyways, for 3 days. So that was in February of 2020, and as I was watching the newscast on TV, I was watching all the strange stuff happening. Okay, there's cases in Seattle, but nobody knows what's going on. And, you know, should we be alarmed? Should we not be alarmed? So when I was released, I had to wear a mask because there were patients coming in and out. And I had called for a transporter, and I'm watching the app on my phone, and I'm watching the driver get closer and closer. And as soon as he had pulled up into the driveway behind some other cars, I waved. And as soon as he took one look at me, he darted out of line and sped off. And so this was the middle of February. It was really cold. I was really weak, and I was just praying to God that I could get another ride. That was my wake-up call about being Asian. And I knew exactly what was happening when it happened. And so unfortunately, I had another incident a month after that, and this was in the news article that Kay LaFond had written, which brought us all together, actually. So sometime in March, and people are social distancing now, and people are wearing masks, I was in a store that I usually frequent, and the people behind the counter did know me. I mean, there's not very many Asian women running around town. So I'm standing there, and I'm watching them wait on 2 customers in front of me. So I waited, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes, and they're talking, you know, oh, sure, you know, all nice, we'll show you over here and things like that, you know, we'll get your stuff. And I step up to the counter, there were 2 guys sitting behind the counter, and they would look at me, and then they looked away, and then they looked at me, and then they looked away. And I could feel my face just turning like 9 shades of red, because it must have been 20 or 30 seconds that I'm just standing there. Anyways, one of them finally did step up to the counter and reluctantly rang up my items. And it was then that I realized that, you know, it wasn't, anyways, there's some other things too that I had witnessed. A year ago, I think it was, when I got my booster shot, I witnessed teenagers, 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl crossing in the intersection, and there was a man in a pickup truck that was turning, and he was leaning out and pointing at them and yelling things at them. Anyways, there wasn't really much I could do. I did lay on the horn, and I leaned out my window and I pointed at him as he's going by. But one of the things that I learned, and actually it was through this group too, because I felt like, why are these things happening to me, or why am I the one who's witnessing them? One of the things that we learned from some of the news reports, or Stop Asian Hate, there's actually an organization that reports these kinds of things. It usually happens to the elderly or single women because they're easier targets. And I actually felt better about that, because I thought, I must have some really negative energy that I'm like drawing all this to me. But unfortunately, with all these, you know, the different attacks around the country, it's the vulnerable who usually are the targets. So just another sobering piece to the puzzle. I do feel safe in Traverse City. I haven't had an incident since those 2 that was early on in the pandemic. So I do feel generally safe in the community.
It's interesting though, because every once in a while, so my husband is Lebanese American, and so before the pandemic, it's like if there's some sort of news event, it's like, oh God, I hope it's not like an Arab terrorist, or I hope it's some mass shooting by some Asian person. But just the way the news sometimes then kind of comes at us, I blocked this memory. I had to be reminded of it by my husband, and then I actually talked about it with a colleague. I teach at NMC, and I remember at one point walking somewhere and on campus, and like, you know, it was about the time when I guess one of our pilots, an American pilot, had gone down in China, and just like, somebody just said, give them back, and I was like, they said it to me, and I'm like, what? It was just, but there's that kind of, here's somebody from a group, and let's just speak to that for whatever sort of reason. So, again, that was like kind of just, it was just really passing and fleeting, but those kinds of things happen, and, so, yeah, that sense of security here, but at the same time, there is this, I worry about, my daughter, and, but I more so I would just kind of think about, why is I'm talking to my mother, and they live in Los Angeles, and she's asking me, please check in on my nephew who lives in New York, because they're watching the news. So everybody, it's like telephone tag. Everybody's worried about the other person in the other place. And I'm just, hoping that they're careful when they go out on their errands, right? So I think for me, it's been interesting because it's made it really pronounced how I start to kind of recognize, wow, there are other groups who live with this all the time, and which is, I think, why, that sense of working together across lines has become important as well. So,
Well, to that point about thinking about our children, I mean, sometimes I ask myself, like, well, why does this conversation, like, even matter? And I think it matters because representation matters. Because if you are young and you can see other people who are doing great things that look kind of like you, then you have a sense of that future, of that, like, future making for yourself. But if you kind of grow up always thinking that you're alone, it's very hard to, like, think beyond and, like, think beyond, like, the walls that are immediately around you or the community immediately around you, and to, like, have that sense of curiosity and, like, venturing out. And so this becomes a generational problem, right? Like, if all of our bright, talented people don't feel safe, or they feel like there's not representation, then they leave. And then we're kind of like back to this cycle where we can't grow that and make things different and better for everybody.
There was a time when I actually thought about moving when the pandemic first hit, but then I think it was like 6 months later, I thought, nope, I'm staying. You guys are just all gonna have to get used to me.
Yeah, I can add that, I've always felt like pretty lucky and I guess like insulated. And so especially with the pandemic, like, I've never, I guess like for me personally, I've always felt, like Saku said, just like, really a part of this community, really supported by this community. We spent a lot of time just kind of actually, if anything, even delving even more into like our culture, just having so much time at home and everything. And so, from a personal standpoint, like, the pandemic has actually, on one hand, been great. We've been able to, kind of really cook a lot and, do all these kinds of like really amazing things with all the time. I think where it was difficult for me was thinking about, my elders. And, that made it even worse, I think, when you started to see all the hate crimes and attacks and things like that. Because, during a pandemic, you can't go out, can't do anything, so immediately your thoughts are like, what's my mom gonna do? What's my dad gonna do? Like everything. They're all older and everything. And then seeing these attacks happen, it just rocked me to my core because, that lady that got beat up looks like my grandma, or that old man, that poor old man that got beat up, like looks like my uncle. And so you see I think yourself and these connections to yourself and your community, like in, you know, the larger community, I think as a whole. You know, I think that's something that's just part of, I think, maybe the culture of like this kind of familial like responsibility and connection. And I think where it got really hard for me is, you know, really in the thick of it, I just, you know, especially with the Vietnamese community and, you know, kind of the trauma that, you know, an entire generation of refugees that ended up here, not only went through, but then also because they needed to survive, because they had families look out, you know, had that they had to raise and look out for and everything. A lot of what they went through, the just kind of the uprooting, the loss of identity, loss of, you know, everything, and even lives, you know, a lot of it was like buried, you know, because you didn't have time to actually deal with it, you didn't have time to acknowledge it and things. And so, you know, what I noticed was this, particularly in that generation of refugees that you know, that came over. You know, there was a lot of trauma that actually came out in a number of like different ways, and it was really, really tough for me to kind of bear witness to it and see, because it kind of lifted that veil of just like, you know, working hard, just like, you know, doing everything that you're supposed to do, and just kind of like bearing all these things where now it's like everything was just laid bare. And so that was not only seeing that and witnessing that, but then also understanding of like how that trauma and like those feelings, emotions, and everything also, you know, in a generational way, path, like made its way to me, and like I identified those feelings, you know, that I was seeing in others as well. That was really tough. You know, I guess I myself didn't realize that I even had these things, and so there's a lot of like kind of like, you know, inflection points and things of just really trying to reconcile, you know, I guess like what was, you know, what I was born into, what was handed on to me. So
I wonder too, I mean, with that sense of like kind of what you just said, Tony, that kind of survival mode, maybe that can kind of help us think about, you know, if our families, our parents or our grandparents immigrated, you know, what did they pass down to us? It was this sense of put your head down, do your work. That we're going to embody kind of the American work ethic even more so, probably. So can, maybe we could shift and talk about that Asian model minority kind of idea. And I thought about it at one point because in the email exchange once, Saku had written something about, she says, oh, you know, I had studied film and then I went to the dark side and I got my econ degree or something like that. And I thought, wow, that was so telling because it was like, oh, you know, I think a number of us kind of we're going to pick the practical, and I suppose it's not uniquely Asian American, but it feels like there are certain kinds of careers, like in my family, it was like engineering or pharmacy or that kind of stuff, that's where you're gonna go. So I guess maybe we can reflect on that idea of the Asian model minority myth, if how you've coped with it or how you've experienced it either in the past or, you know.
We might have to ask our parents that.
Yeah, in the workplace. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to take that on.
well, I think I had like the opposite experience in that, you know, ever since I was a child, you know, my father was a physician, and I was just, I don't know why, I was just obsessed with being a doctor. I wanted to be a surgeon. And that's all I wanted to do my entire life was one track and everything. And then I think, was it like 7th grade, I sat down with my father and we kind of had the talk, and he was like, you know, what do you want to do? And I was like, I just want to be a doctor. And he's like, and he actually talked me out of it. Still don't really understand where he was coming from, other than, you know, maybe, you know, being a Vietnamese doctor, where, you know, where he came from, and then coming to the American system and dealing with like the insurance and like the whole like, you know, healthcare system and everything. You know, what he told me was that like he knew that I had a good heart and I wanted to help people, but this wasn't a good way to do it, basically, because I think maybe it was just his experience with the system. And so, as a result, on a totally unintended result for him, I switched gears and became a musician instead. And toured around in a band for like 15 years. I think in the end, he was a rare Asian parent that tried to understand me and just who I was as a person and wanted me to be happy, and so he kind of shepherded me away from, doing this doctor thing just because that was like the thing to do or whatever. But in the end, yeah, I was completely happy, and I completely found not only my happiness but also my creativity, which has kind of like led me to build the life that that I continue to build, and so. Yeah, even though, like I said, it was unintended as far as like, probably the path that I took, I did find, and I'm leading a life of happiness, and I'm really happy that my dad had that conversation with me, so.
Yeah, my my experience is actually quite similar to Tony's. My grandfather, I think when my mom married my dad, that's when things changed, because my mom was supposed to marry a Japanese doctor and stay in Oahu and take care of my grandfather. Like, he had this all mapped out, right? I'm gonna set you up with this guy, get married, that whole thing. And then my mom marries my dad, who's a pharmacist, but he lived in Nebraska. So that meant leaving Hawaii. And honestly, I think my mom and my dad, my mom in many ways, because she had a lot of negative experiences growing up as a kid, connected to her Asian Japanese identity, sort of like went the polar opposite with everything. And so she's like, do whatever you want, we'll support you. There was never any pressure on my parents to do. My dad had one conversation with me at some point when I was in high school, like, oh, you think, pharmacy maybe? I'm like, no, Dad, that's not gonna happen. I'm terrible at chemistry, it's just not me. But my grandfather, when he was still alive, he died in 2008, his big dream for us as kids was to finish high school. High school in Hawaii is so important, it's such a big deal. And he never got to do that. He got to go to school up to the 4th grade, and that was it. And they said, no, you got to go back and work the pineapple plantations. So high school was the big kind of victory for us as kids. And then beyond that, it's like, I don't know anything about college. You guys figure it out. But no, I had pretty supportive parents too.
I think I had like the opposite experience. My parents were, my mom particularly wanted me to pursue pharmacy, and that was not something I wanted to do. I was terrible at chemistry in high school, and but I started taking classes in my first year at NMC to go toward pre-pharm, and I ended up switching gears just because it was too much. I felt like a ton of pressure, and like throughout high school, I felt like my parents had like such high expectations of me. It was really just a lot to deal with, and so I ended up changing things, and that was fine. It was a healthier choice for me, personally. But I mean, sometimes I feel like guilty about like not upholding my parents' expectations of me. I don't feel guilty about it anymore because I'm just doing, what I want and what I'm enjoying and what I love. My parents are fine with that now. So, but yeah, I felt a lot of pressure when I was younger, especially in high school, when I was trying to make those big decisions about my life.
So, I guess I've shared part of this before, but I think the closer you are to like an immigration experience, the higher the expectations are, and then it's a pretty steep cliff after that. Because I think, I'm certainly seeing this evolve with my own mom, but her idea of success has just like dramatically changed over time. And as she has, seen my sister and I grow up into our own individuals and our own interests and, kind of successes. And it was, I think, a very freeing experience for all of us when we kind of all just came to realize, like, oh, yeah, we're just gonna be people, and we're gonna love each other and support each other and have some fun. And so I think that is a very common experience of children of immigrants, because oftentimes, like in my household, neither of my parents really spoke English, so I had to do like the applications, and they didn't know anything about college, and so you have to and there was no internet back then, right? That's how old I am. So you kind of have to figure out all these things on your own, because that is kind of part, critical to assimilating. And I think assimilating is such a huge theme when you're just so fresh from that experience. But, I talk to, friends who are 4th, 5th, 6th generation Japanese Americans from Hawaii or wherever their, country of origin is. And it's so different from kind of the expectations that might have been set from those first generations, that at some point, and I do really hope that we all become more of a melting pot, because that was a really positive experience for me growing up, just knowing that when you ask someone, oh, where are you from? You can say 18 different things, because that's how, kind of generationally integrated it is and how accepting it can be. I wouldn't call it a post-racial community, because there are still ways to acknowledge people's differences and how they were raised differently and how their cultures are different, and still be accepting and in the same room and sharing a table together. So that's kind of where I hope this all goes, right? Because the closer we are, the harder it feels, because you're still just learning everything. But there's a lot of opportunity to grow and really build new traditions, right? Kind of mixing it all up together. That's kind of exciting for me.
So I had this conversation with Judy when we first met back a year ago, and I was supposed to be an engineer growing up.
So was I.
Yes, that was the traditional Chinese or anyways, Asian expectations, high expectations. I felt a lot of pressure growing up to be my absolute best, and I was a musician. I also did get good grades, but I don't know, I was kind of rebellious. I played trombone, so
Well, that's
you
not
know.
the right instrument. It's supposed to be piano or violin.
No, my father wanted me to play something smaller, but, trombone was a lot of fun. And so, in the Asian expectations, I actually made it to All-State Jazz Band. I was one of 5 trombonists in the state. Thank you. Yeah. So, that was my, okay, you've got expectations. But, actually my father did say, if you want to go into music, Amy, it's okay. But there was this thing in my head, just because my cousins were so darn smart, they were like geniuses, and they had pressure on them too, that I just couldn't do that in my head. So, after getting C's and D's in chemistry and physics, I dropped out of school for a while. And it wasn't until I came up here, I was 27, that I started taking some design classes. And I am a former graphic designer by trade. And after 10 years, that was not really fulfilling for me either, doing engineering brochures and things like that. So I evolved into bodywork, and that's where I'm at now. So Denny, do follow your passion. Do the things that you're interested in. I'm glad to hear you say that you are following those paths.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the time. We've been going for a while. We've got a couple more questions, but I think it might be good if some folks some of you might have some questions, it might be helpful. I don't know if we talked about how this would work, Melissa, you're coming up. Yeah, so you can think a little bit about that. But I guess, so Denny, you grew up here, but so you don't quite remember when you moved here.
We moved here when I was very,
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 very
young,
young.
like in my first
Right.
couple of years.
Yeah. So, but I'm curious, with the other folks, so it's kind of a two-pronged question. What was it like kind of moving to TC, Traverse City, or what's it like kind of being here? I know that when I first came and then in 1999 and then ended up getting married, my friends from California, they're like, oh, do we need to get a car when we come to your wedding? Because my one college roommate had this notion, it was that movie with Christopher Reeve, she thought there were horse carriages. It was she thought this was Mackinac Island, I guess. And I'm like, yeah, you need a car when you come here. In 1999, I came and there was no Asian store. We'd go to Flint. My husband's from Flint. There was an Asian store there that I'd make a beeline toward.
Full market.
Yeah, and then I would have some students every once in a while say, oh, we've got Asians. I went to school with some Asians. Yeah, lots. And I was like, where are they? What was it like for folks when they came here? Amy, you came here earliest. My parents have only been here twice, and so they just think it's so green and pretty, compared to California. But maybe we can talk about that. And again, if you have a question at some point, you can think about that, and we'll weave that in.
Yeah, so when I moved up in 1990, I actually had played soccer, 14 years. They had just started the girls program at Central High School. They were in their second year, so I jumped in to be an assistant coach for the girls' high school program at that time. And then I started coaching T-Bays, and I coached T-Bays for 10 years. And then for 2 of the last 10 years, I was actually a paid coach at East Junior High, and I helped launch the girls' freshman soccer program there. So when I moved to Traverse City, I actually got involved in the community quickly, and the parents were great. They were just happy that there was a woman who had played soccer. So I had a very positive and favorable connection with the community. And then I also did go to NMC to study visual communications. And when I first moved up here, I landed in Elk Rapids. That was kind of a trip, but anyways, that was before the marina was in. But my experiences have been positive, and I think I've had an early connection with the community.
Yeah, I think, some of it is relative to where we were coming from, right? So I lived 8 years in rural West Central Indiana, really rural, population 6,000 when the college wasn't there, 8,000 with the college students there. So, we had to drive an hour and a half to get to anything that, even Target was an hour and 20 minutes away. So, when I took the job up here and several people said, well, now, Traverse City's kind of isolated. I don't know about that. There's actually quite a bit here for a small community, right? And that was actually for us, that was the draw. And then, Judy, I think we connected pretty early on when I started, and then we've been many of us have been involved in the NMC DEI committee, and there's lots of you guys here tonight. But that was a way to just connect pretty quickly, and those were relationships and resources and things that I just didn't have for the past 8 years prior to coming here. when I lived in Chicago, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff there, but my professional life, this has been a big change.
I think actually, I mean, yeah, where you come from. So I'm originally from the West Coast and had some grad school out in Chicago, but my girlfriend who teaches at a community college out in Bay Area, she was like, you're the only Asian faculty member, you know, for a long time. She kept saying that. So that sense of, yeah, I think when I saw Craig cross the Haggerty, you know, far away, I was like, his name's not, but I can tell. Okay, there's an Asian
I teach E's classes, so maybe that could be something. But.
No, and we do have, but there, that sense of, yeah, you do feel kind of like this weird pioneer in a way. And then I think, oh, you know, when I would have students, and sometimes they might be like, you know, kids who were adopted, Asian, that was like something that I wasn't familiar with from Los Angeles suburbs, you know. We were all immigrant kids, but then there would be like Asians who were adopted and who grew up in white families here, you know, and that was interesting for me to kind of figure that out as well. And so becoming aware of that, but there's definitely kind of, I mean, I do see more, and that's encouraging, but yeah, that's kind of where I am. I don't know, Denny, if you ever, not how it was when you first came, but how it's been.
Well, I mean, I guess it's been, you know, largely nice. Yeah, I didn't get bullied in school or anything. It did feel weird. You know, I think early on I was very aware that I was the only, like, Asian kid in, like, my classroom. And it was just like, you know, I don't know. I felt different sometimes, but I didn't always think about it. So, and, you know, getting into high school, I started, you know, being a lot more conscious of it, and people would start asking me, like, some questions about, like, where I'm from, and, like, I've gotten questions about, like, you know, whether or not I eat certain kinds of animals. And so just things like that. So I became more conscious of it. I was actually going through my high school yearbook the other day, and I counted how many, like, of the Asian kids were in there, and there were, like, maybe 10 to 15 people. A few of them were, like, exchange students, and that's out of a graduating class of, like, about 400. So that's, like, not a lot of Asian kids. And so, I mean, I felt like, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been feeling like I've been lacking, like, any sense of community, like, with other Asian people, just because I hadn't had that growing up. I don't know any, like, you know, Vietnamese people, like, my age, so I couldn't really connect. And it was just a little different. And I'm also the eldest of three. My younger brother's 14, turning 15 now, maybe. I don't know. And my sister turns 12 this year. So there's an age gap, and I've just, you know, I grew up with them too, and it's just been really interesting watching them grow up, and go through school, and, you know, I don't know how they feel about it, but, you know, it's just interesting watching them go through the same kind of thing.
I remember, I mean, so my daughter, and she's in here somewhere, she's a 10th grader at Central High School. But I remember at one point in her middle school, she said, "Mom, you have to read this. This is such a good story." It was from her book. It was a story by Murakami. And I remember looking at that, and I was like thinking, wow, she's reading a short story by a major Japanese, you know, writer. And I thought, you know, I didn't read anything like that. And so that, I felt good at that moment. And I don't know if, she was just saying, it's beautiful, she just wanted me to kind of read it. And I don't know if it impacted her the way it actually impacted me. That's actually what's been interesting for me when I think about kind of, how's it's like when Shang-Chi opened up, I took her and a couple of her friends, and I remember sitting there in the museum, not the museum, in the theater with my mask on, freaking out about more being in a theater during COVID, but watching and kind of, hearing the Chinese on the screen, because they were like, it was a scene where they were talking to like the grandmother, and hearing my daughter and her friends just giggle, and I was like, wow, this is different. It's like something is shifted. You were talking about the representation. It's just, this is normal, and my daughter's friends are just kind of watching this, and it's just kind of be part of it now. And so those have been interesting moments for me, because hopefully, like Sakura said, we're maybe trying to get to another place, but there, and that's why I think it's so important, supporting our schools to try to broaden that curriculum and to kind of make these sorts of efforts and trying to educate, which is what, our series of events is trying to do with the Vincent Chin documentary and just the story of the immigrant family and Minari, trying to shed some light. So hopefully that just more of us are just kind of versed in it. I think that's really important.
Judy, you talked about that sense of pride because you saw this with, your daughter and her friends. My daughter's class had a cultural tradition or cultural foods day, and everyone signs up to bring something. A lot of pierogies and mashed potatoes, and she's like, "I want to bring miso soup for the class." And I was like, "Ooh, that's kind of smelly, and I'm not sure if everyone's gonna like it." But she just was like beaming with pride and like wanted everyone to have it. And so I bring like an instant pot of miso soup to her school. And I was curious because I remember being young and kind of like being the kid with the stinky lunch because I had leftovers or, things that weren't sandwiches. And I was maybe like projecting that like fear into this situation. So I just gingerly asked her, I was like, well, like, how'd it go? She was like, great. Like, duh, Mom, why wouldn't it be great, right? And I was like, oh, all right, this is so cool. And my son did a 3rd grade cookbook for his class, and you had to, it was sharing a family tradition recipe. And he wanted to do steamed red snapper with ginger and onion sauce. And I was like, all right, we're gonna be okay here.
Sounds amazing.
I have the recipe.
I realized just how different things are, though. Maybe a few months ago, my son's, packing his snack. He's got to take like 5 snacks to 1st grade, right? So he grabs a pack of the seaweed, the prepackaged stuff. He goes, I'm like, oh, are you sure you want to take that? He said, oh yeah, like 4 of my friends in school, they all bring this stuff. It's like, that was not my experience as a kid. You would not catch me doing that, because I knew where that was going to end up, right? Like, people were going to say, what are you eating? That stinks. I avoided anything like that. It stayed home, right? But just the way his experience is now, it's just shifted so much just within a generation, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to just really how awesome this community is here. I'll be completely honest, I was kind of a hater when I was coming here. I met Soon, my business partner, and I didn't know much about Traverse City other than it's this huge tourist kind of trap of sorts in the summertime, like Cherry Fest. It was just it wasn't really my kind of city or town. And and so I came up here and I met what I thought was the only Asian in town, which is Soon, and we opened up this restaurant, and we were received so well and kindly by the community. but still, there's still something lacking there, because, you know, I just love diverse cities, communities, just like, you know, the culture, the music, the food, like everything, you know, so, you know, it was homogenous up here, I guess, and it was lacking of all those things that, you know, just really make my heart, like, kind of beat, and I get my blood flowing. And so, you know, we opened the restaurant, and I got to know the community through that, and, you know, it's just like it's like the Midwest kindness at its best, you know, up here, and like, you guys are so incredibly, like, nice and welcoming. And then I met what I thought was the only other Asian in town right here. And then I was like, oh, okay, like, this place isn't so bad, I guess. And, you know, it's crazy, because it's been like almost 4 years now, and I feel like I've kind of come full circle to my childhood. So, you know, my family came over as refugees. My father ended up in Flint to do his residency. And from there, our family was adopted by this town called Millington, which is like this tiny farm town. It's kind of crazy. There's like this whole representation up here as well. But it's a tiny farm town, like population like 1,000 people or something. It's like one traffic light. And, you know, he was set up with a practice and became a country doctor. And, you know, it was one of those things where, like, I guess kind of like growing up there, you know, as a kid, like, you know, I had my friends, it was fun and everything. But I also had this other side where, like, you know, all my relatives either were living in like Switzerland or Paris or like LA or like, you know, all these other places, and here we were, and I was very aware, like, you know, in the middle of nowhere basically in this farm town. But as life went on there, and especially as I reflect on it, like, I had such an amazing upbringing there, because it's a small town. I literally knew everybody, and it was just this really amazing tight-knit sense of community there. And I feel that so, like, it's like a giant hug up here, basically, like, you know, going out, like, walking around, like, being able to see each other, like, to me, that's what's so unique about Traverse City. And when you get past the Cherry Fest and everything, there's actually this incredibly diverse community that's, you know, very worldly and progressive and amazing, and, you know, I love it up here. You know, I love the community here as well, so, yeah.
It's 7:30, so I'm, if anyone has questions maybe for us? Jamie.
Hi, hello. I'm Jamie John. I'm Korean American and Indigenous. I'm Native American. I live around the Traverse City area, and we've talked a lot about generational loss and culture and model minority stuff, which is all things that I've had to deal with. I think there's still this pervasive idea, especially in the old Asian American people that I encounter, that if we are to be accepted, that there's this necessity to stay quiet and to do what we're expected to do. And in the interest of moving away from this idea of assimilation and integration, do you, either individually or as a group, have any ideas on how to build collective visibility, power, and safety within our community up here? And this is in the interest of also crossing racial lines as well, respecting that we have our Black relatives that we need to also take care of, and like the interest in living on Native land, and then also tackling this perpetual foreigner idea. But how do we build collective power and safety is my main question, I would think.
Thank you for that.
That's an excellent question. I think we are in the process of getting there. And I just, so I just want to say, give a shout out to Betsy Kofia, because she's sitting right here next to Holly Bird and next to Sally Van Vleck. And they have been instrumental in helping get Northern Michigan E3 off the ground not too long ago. And Northern Michigan E3 has actually done a lot of really, really good anti-racism stuff. I don't know if everybody in here knows, but the body cameras for the police department, they were instrumental with that. Jamie, I think you've got, it's kind of hard, I think, because this is all part of it, the process. And I think, I just, we have a very small AAPI Facebook page. I want to say there might be 7 or 8 people on it right now. So Northern Michigan E3 does have a BIPOC, I want to say at one time they were meeting every other week to get together to talk about some of the difficult conversations of people of color. But they also just took a poll to see what kind of fun get-togethers we can have, like going on hikes and things like that. I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for being open-minded, and for the different reasons that you're here. It's really what we need, and it really warms my heart to see it. So I think it's an educational process, and I think we just keep building on what we've got.
Yeah, Jamie, I just want to say thank you for being incredibly articulate and just knowing the words and exploring for yourself, obviously, like what this means to you. Because I think, it is very difficult to be vulnerable in that way because it's so close to your personal experience and things that we may never solve in our entire lives, right? But it's not really a problem to solve, because I think the more that we can have these conversations and kind of echoing what Amy said, just to see how many people are here to share and to laugh with us and to learn about culture, just opens that door just that inch further, so that we can have conversations after we're done sitting up here with each other and just practicing that. I think it really just takes a lot of practice, because it's become such a tense and heightened, not even issue, right? But just our world is tense. And so it's hard to just be the first one to step out and say, hi, I'm so-and-so. And just have those conversations again, as we're kind of dealing on multiple levels of that engagement. And so thank you for standing up and speaking, because I think you're putting to words what many of us are probably thinking, but haven't quite formulated yet. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I would say too, it's it definitely is a very heavy subject matter, or can be. And yeah, you're right. There's never an answer. There's always just more questions, and it's more of a journey of figuring these things out, figuring out your own personal kind of place or perspectives and all, and that's constantly shifting as well. And so, yeah, I think it's a process, but you're part of the solution. Even just having these thoughts and articulating them and wanting to find the answers and everything, that's how you unwind this generational trauma. It's with you, you're next up, basically. And so I think that's part of it, but I think the other part is also just, it doesn't have to be so heavy. It's part of me is just kind of chuckling inside, because we were just hey, here's a bunch of free awesome Asian food, and look at all everybody that came, and it's haha, now you have to listen to us talk about all these heavy things, and you can't leave. So but yeah, it's all of it. It's everything. And I think, at the end of the day, cultural identity aside, there's just some basic human things like food, music, art, culture, laughter, just connection. Those are the most powerful tools that we have. And those are the things that transcend all these barriers, and brings people together across aisles, across tables, across races, whatever this kind of thing. And so I think the more that we can have events like this centered around, other things, other causes, and really at the end of the day, in support of one another, That's how you do it, and we do it together. You know, it's not just it's too much for one person to bear, but as a community, I mean, this is how we change.
And Jamie, I think it's like that silence or kind of not expressing your voice, that's something that kind of everyone here probably at some point has dealt with, you know. And just being willing to speak out at different times, and it happens, you know, at different life stages too. You're a young man, you know, but it's like I'm in my 50s and starting to realize, oh, I have to speak up now. It's like, now's the time, I have to. So if it's gonna be showing up at some TCAPS board meetings and being uncomfortable and doing that, or waving some signs around, or questioning things that happen in my workplace. I mean, in ways that other folks have never seen me do. I think that's what you have to do, and you have to kind of, but, so there's that kind of work that feels where you're exposed individually, but then having the joy too, and the connection, and talking with other people about it, and then laughing. I mean, that's the balance, right? So hopefully, you know, it doesn't always feel like that stressful kind of, oh, I'm on like spotlight and exposure, you know, and I'm feeling vulnerable. You know, there are those times though where that's definitely there. And then hopefully though, when you're brave enough or you're able to show it, other folks recognize it. They do. And they can kind of connect to you that way. And then you find other people. You find other Asians that you didn't know existed. But yeah, definitely that sense of cross-racial. I mean, there are just those different kinds of, I mean, like I said, the pandemic, all of that really heightened for me, like, oh, that's kind of what all those massive protests in this, you know, in the summer of 2020, kind of what our Black and brown brothers go through all the time, you know, even when, like I think some of us showed up at E3 and it was a march through downtown after the Patrick Leola shooting, that I think Marshall Collins was saying, looking at that and saying, he's like the age of my nephews, you know, my sons, all of that, and just kind of recognizing, you know, I thought of that when. Oh, okay. You're welcome. Yeah.
Question over there.
Yeah, yeah. So but thank you for sharing that. We have one question and we do have to close.
And I have the mic.
Yes, okay.
Well, first of all, Judy, you just led into my question, and so that made this a little bit easier. But I look at all of you, well, maybe one exception over there, but as pioneers in taking that step to move up here and knowing that it was going to be different, and you have certainly done very well and have blessed our community very much. My question for you is, you know, you look out at this mass of people here and all of us from the Traverse City area, we're not really all that diverse, obviously, it's nothing new. What would you, and this can't be answered just in the next few minutes, but what might be some ideas that you would have that we as a community can do collectively together to make this area much more inviting, that it becomes more diverse and that it welcomes people from all diversities to this community to live?
I,
Just for the recording, please. Just not you, just to summarize, the people that, if you could just summarize before you answer.
That's gonna be tough. What can we do to encourage more?
Diversity.
What would we suggest to kind of encourage making Traverse City more welcoming for more diverse people?
Yeah, I think it comes down to intention. And, you know, we're not on an island. We have an entire state of like, you know, just vast diversity and everything that we can reach out to. And so for me, one really easy suggestion, or, you know, at least tangible suggestion, is reaching out to other cities and like creating like, you know, like cultural exchanges or different exchanges and everything. And so, you know, I bring that from example, like, you know, in Flint, like we have exchanges with multiple cities with with artists and things like that. And so we have the facilities here. You know, if the intention's there, then, you know, the network and the outreach and everything will follow it. And so I think part of it is the intention of outreaching, but then we also have to have, you know, the ability to host people as well. And I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers for, you know, more like Black and brown communities to be able to come up to Traverse City, is like it's just so expensive for most people here. Especially when it comes to like, you know, really creative, like starving artists and things like that as well. And so, you know, I find the community is like so, you know, I guess for lack of a better term, like hungry for more diversity and everything up here. But those pathways, you know, aren't really laid out. And so if we can have more intention behind it and make it more equitable, then I think that's at least a start.
I am wondering if there are like DEI funds somehow that could maybe be tapped into for some of these ideas. I think there's more, as I'm finding out, maybe Judy and Craig can speak more to that, and maybe Saku too, because I only know of the funding that we got for tonight, so anyways, to pay for some of the food. I mean, I don't know, are there programs or are there dollars out there that might be correlated somehow?
I think possibly, yeah. I think this is, you know, inaugural event, right? But I think we're building right now. So I think that's kind of exciting, and it's really great to see so many people here. Craig, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna say, well, thank you for the question, but also, yeah, like many of us moving up here, trying to figure it out, you know, I'm like, are there Asian grocery stores? Where can I get stuff? Building events, building infrastructure that I think helps us connect as community, but then also creates that sort of intercultural dialogue and exchange, right? So that we can learn from each other, so we can share our stories. I think just even a little more intentionality about, oh, we're creating an event. Yes. But with that, I would just say, it doesn't have to be large things, but some of those little things actually mean a lot to someone who's a newcomer to the area, right? Wow, someone took time to think about this. It could be something that means a lot, you know, to folks coming up here.
And one other thing I would like to add too, because I actually went through this thought process myself, but, you know, everybody thinks about diversity and inclusion and everything in certain aspects, but, you know, don't forget about the I in BIPOC. You know, we are surrounded by, like, you know, an incredible community of indigenous and tribal, of tribal communities and people. And so I think if anything, before we even start to think outside and like, you know, extending across, like what about our actual neighbors that are actually here? And like, how about we can definitely start with that as well and try to bridge those gaps.
Thank you for that, because I always like to, my little spiel on diversity is changing a mindset, first of all, because this place is originally brown. So the diversity is everybody else, right? So, and in fact, you know, I could say these guys look a lot more like us. So when I hear Amy saying things like, where are you from, you don't belong, or, you know, that otherness, I just kind of like go, I don't know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? But for people who come here, one of the biggest things that we hear in our E3 mailbox is from people who are visiting, you know, from BIPOC people who are like, what is there to do for us? You know, who can we meet up with? And there aren't many places, right? Because like you said, a lot of people are either adopted or they're small numbers. And I'm really wanting to remember right now, like with this group that's here, the fact that there's a whole group of Asian people in this area who are all working in restaurants right now who can't be here, like the more recent immigrants. And I did reach out to a lot of them to come, and they couldn't be here. But also not being afraid to go up to them, and I've done this to so many people in town, like, hey, we have a group called E3 that has a social group. You look like a BIPOC person. You want to come hang out with us, you know? And it sometimes it just takes that much to do that, even in our super busy schedules with our super busy lives, knowing that it's there. You know, there's a sense of security in knowing that it's there. But also part of this solidarity work and safety work is building good allies. And so there's a lot of ways you can do that too. See me afterwards. But it's really important that you're here.
I think we're gonna have to end it now on that note, but thank you for your question. Thank you all for being here and for showing up. And it's really exciting for us, and it gives us kind of a sense of, in the future, this moving forward. And as far as E3, Juneteenth is coming up too. So, and that'll be at NMC. Thank you.